Hello and welcome to the Better Business Podcast, the podcast that helps you improve your family-owned retail business. My name is Steve Cook. I'm a third-generation business owner, and with the things I've learned and talk about on this show, I've taken my family's retail business to over $10 million in sales. Now let's get to the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Better Business Podcast. I am your host, as always, Steve Cook. Today, my guest's name is Derrick Michaud. He is the CEO and founder of Shelby Row Productions. Shelby Row Productions takes the challenge of publishing a podcast out of your hands. They provide services for audio and video editing. They make audiograms, videograms, transcribe, cover art, and many, many other things. Shelby Row also has a podcast called PodLogics, where Derrick hosts a show talking and trying to help podcasters create and produce a show. Derrick, thank you for being on and welcome to the show.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you reaching out and inviting me onto this show. It's nice to not have to pitch and try to ask people to be on their show. So when you Instagram direct messaged me, I was all in for it. So I appreciate it.
It's refreshing every once in a while to get somebody reaching out to you, huh?
Yeah. It's like, all right. I feel special.
Heck of a deal. Yeah. I stumbled across your Instagram page, which led me to then your podcast, of course, and listened to a few episodes and was like, man, that's interesting, just listening for my own pleasure. But the reason I was wanting to have you on is because I think a lot of businesses here in the last, it seems like few months, I've had a lot of business friends and people that I know talking to me about wanting to start their own show for business reasons, just trying to, specifically attach it to their business and make it as somewhat of a lead generator. Have you been seeing that a lot lately in your world as well?
Absolutely. People are starting to really understand podcast as a marketing arm or a marketing branch or whatever you want to call it. Not just buddies hanging out. The old joke was like the kid downstairs in his mom's house with Cheeto dust fingertips on a podcast. Like that's kind of used to be the back in 2000, 10, 11, 12, that's what podcasters were, right? But now, it's a viable marketing tool. It's more than just trying to get downloads and maybe monetize. No, it's a way to strengthen your place in your industry. And for me, what I feel like is best about podcasting is the absolute networking power that it brings. Because if you're doing a weekly podcast and you're doing a new interview each week within your space, whether it's health, CEO, executive talk, whatever your podcast is about, whatever industry you're in, think about all the people you're meeting and the relationships that you're making. That if that brings in a couple new clients to your business and you can tell it was directly related to your podcast, that's your monetization right there. And people are figuring that out and they're truly buying in on it. And it's good to see.
I've seen that as well in my day-to-day business. I guess you could say we sell horse feed and horse supplies. It has nothing to do with this podcast, of course, but I have a show that I kind of like a YouTube show, I guess you could say, called Steve's Horse Show. And one thing that I've seen people at the surprise is asking people to be on my show that is not a customer. They actually feed from a competitor or something similar to that. Have you seen that in your experience with podcasts as well, that you can ask somebody to be on your show and establish a relationship with them in that way? I've seen that is almost as much or more powerful than asking people that are already customers of mine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I recently started interviewing more producers, so more lateral guests instead of podcasters about how they handle their podcast. Because early on, I wanted to talk. I started with clients, brand new podcast. You ask a client, "Can you do me a favor? Can you be on my show, my episode 1 with 0 downloads?" So And then you start breaking into, I started inviting in podcasters, and then I rolled into bringing in producers, because now it's like, if our audience is podcasters, let's let them listen to two producers talk about things. And that's when it started clicking for me about building those relationships for me. Even though we offer the same services in a way, I guess, we're all, the producers are all in this together, but we're all doing our own thing, whether they're still solopreneur-ish, more coach, strategist, or people like me that have like a team that's more production flow and systemizing. That can build referral partnerships and really, and then help each other. Like I might meet a producer that is teaching me something right in real time as I'm interviewing them, and he might learn something from me, and that helps our businesses separately too. So I'm not sure if that's where you were going with that question. I don't know if I answered it right, but
yeah, that's all good advice, man. Just the guest potential in general, whether you're asking customers, hopeful customers, future customers, if you will, vendors, or even somewhat competitors. I think that the guest potential is something that a lot of people don't think about when they say, I want to have a podcast. They're thinking of just the people listening, but there's so much potential to the people that you're talking to on the other line as well.
Oh yeah. It's so powerful, that networking. That person might know someone that needs you. Yeah.
Very good point. The main audience that I try to appeal to is people that are in family businesses and people that are in specifically family retail businesses. And those are the people that I've been hearing from a lot that have been saying, I want to start a podcast, or I want to start, some sort of marketing, use it for a marketing channel. Coming from that lens, from, what you do in your business, what do you think some of the biggest pitfalls are that a business would go into this? They would come in, eyes wide open, maybe go into the podcast world. And what are some of the biggest mistakes that you've seen businesses make getting into a podcast?
Make the mistake number one, they think it's easy.
Amen.
and they don't understand how much work it takes, even when using a producer like myself that handles a lot. At the end of the day, there's things I can't handle. I cannot, and what we don't. Some production companies handle and help with booking. That's not our lane. And I'm very upfront about that. So now the host has to think of the guest, has to book that interview, spend time researching and preparing. The time
Believe it or not, it's not as easy as you would think.
Right.
I mean, it's a challenge. Yeah.
And then the 45-minute to 60-minute real-time interview, that takes time, okay? And then delegating it to your producer, okay, now that your role is sort of done there. If you're doing your marketing, cool, now I give back all these assets to you, Steve. I've given you your finished edited episode, your videograms, audiograms, and we can explain what those assets, I guess, if you want later, but now it's back to you. It's back on you, Steve. How are you going to push that stuff out? How are you going to market it? So what I find, and can be quite frustrating, being completely honest, is people come in hot. I want to do all of these things, and they're like, oh, wow, this is a lot of work. And it's frustrating as the producer, because you get a lot of burnout and people just like, I can't do this. So then what happens is, and so what happens is they come in strong and they do a weekly podcast, which is the ideal model. And then it turns to bi-weekly. And then like, I can only do one a month. And then it's
taking a break.
And then, and then, you know what? I'm only going to podcast when I'm inspired. Well, talk to you later, because you're never coming back. Like, I know what that means.
That's like working out when you're inspired, huh?
Exactly. Yeah. You know what? I'm only do push-ups when I'm truly in Zen and ready for push-ups. So come in with realistic expectations on the front end. Let's not even think about the networking and how you can use it as a marketing tool. That's important, and you'll get there. But please come in with realistic expectations on how much bandwidth you have. All the hosts out there listening and wanting to use their podcast as marketing or interested in starting one, just be real with yourself and how much time you can truly commit to this new part of your business, because it's inevitable. You've just added 2 to 5 hours a week to your bandwidth if you want to do a weekly podcast. It just is what it is. So come to terms with that. And if you feel like you can't do that, then, all right, maybe on the beginning, let's do every other week. Let's do a bi-weekly podcast. Not as ideal as weekly, but it's a good starting point. It gives you more bandwidth to kind of get used to it. If you're doing that for a whole year, now you're talking about 26 guests rather than 52. That's a huge difference. It's a huge weight lifted. So I would say, number one tip, sit down and really be real with yourself. How much time and effort do you want to put into this? Stop focusing on the awesomeness of having a cool podcast and all the things you can do with it and all the fun things you want to talk about and all the smart things that you know. That's all good. You need all that, but be real and set honest expectations.
Let's say that perhaps you and I haven't already talked somebody out of wanting to do a podcast so far in this episode.
I'm not doing my business any service.
They haven't, and they haven't turned it off yet. Because I completely agree, man. It's a ton of work, and of course there's parts to it, just like working out or just like in any business or whatever, that are incredibly enjoyable. Yeah. But there is a ton of work to it. But let's say somebody hasn't turned this episode off so far, and they're still listening, and they say, okay, that's great. I understand this is going to be a lot of work. Where do you start? Where does somebody start?
So you want to find the sort of what I call the who, what, why, how, and where. Basically your story, and there's better strategists out there that really are more in tune with that side of things. But on the simplest form, you got to decide not only who you want to talk to, but what do you want to talk about, and who are you, Steve? So you're telling your audience who you are, what this is about, why you're doing it, what kind of problems you're trying to solve for people, how you're going to do it. I'm going to do it by talking to other industry leaders, or I'm going to help you with this by giving you the best advice, whatever it is, how. And why you're doing it. Those details are important. So then you can dial in on who it is that you want to talk to. That's number one. So then once you get that vision down, and that at the beginning, this is going to change. This could completely change 10 episodes down the road. It's hard to really know. Like then you start realizing, you start getting in front of a microphone, and now you want to start recording some episode, and you're like, oh, I actually want to talk about this other thing. I'm more passionate about that. Okay, you can make that change, but let's flip the story around. So now, why do you want to talk about that? What are the problems you're solving? How are you going to help people with it? So it's that messaging that's really crucial. And then after that, it's, now you're just piecing things together. You need a cover art. So you need before you make a cover art, before you give someone a few $100s to make a cover art, well, what's the name of the podcast? So those, now you're just starting with the little details. Come up with a good name. Don't call it the Awesome Podcast. That does nothing for you. You need to narrow it down a little bit more. So try to have a punchy name that kind of explains what this is going to be about, and then a good tagline is always helpful to kind of really then 3 to 4 word
describe
tagline.
It further.
Yeah, and then make a nice little cover art for it, and then you want to write your description. Now it's a longer form of the who, what, why, where, and how. Record a trailer if you already have equipment. We can get into that whole thing. That's a whole other ball of wax there, but let's say you have your little recording setup that you want to use, and it's good to go. Well, then now sit down and write and just record a trailer. So this is just another bio, if you will. Now it's even more extended. You went from a snappy podcast title to a nice little 500-word description bio, and now you're going to talk for 5 minutes and talk to the audience that you don't have yet, but pretend that you do, going into more detail on the who you are. So, Steve, you sit back and you give us a little more
somewhat of a funnel,
story.
basically, is what you're saying. You know, the title of the episode tells you a little bit, the description tells you a little more, and then the trailer would tell you. You know, it's almost a funnel that you would go down to see if you're even interested in listening to this podcast.
Because they can get to your trailer, and now they're getting to know Steve, and they're hearing your voice, and then on a production level, that gives the producer, like myself, the file. We need the cover art. We need all that text, the description, in order to syndicate you, meaning we push you to iTunes and Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and everything. And then at that point, you need to sign up for a host platform. You know, now we're really starting to dig into the weeds. But those are the developmental stuff at the most basic form. But if you're working with a higher level strategist, they're digging deeper in where can we be placed in the podcast space and research and brand identity and all that stuff. But that's high level stuff. But those are the things you want to think about. And then once you're launched and you're published and you are a podcaster, then you got to start thinking of that production flow and content flow and what it is that you want to do.
So as far as, let's say that somebody makes it past all those steps or perhaps they've already been going with their podcast, where do you see a lot of pitfalls and a lot of mistakes that people make as far as the actual editing and the producing of the podcast goes, like kind of where you sit? Mm-hmm. Do you think that people have a lot of mistakes around guests or solo episodes or something similar to that could either make their life easier or it could perhaps make their show sound or look a lot better?
Great question. You know, and there's a lot of variables in that. So let's say, for example, I'm going to use you for an example, Steve. And the topic for this second here is how you opened up this episode. You had a very flattering intro for me. I appreciate that personally. That's just between you and me. But you set it up for the listener. You know, within seconds, the listener knew who you were talking to and who they're going to hear and what Derrick is and what he's about. There's some situations where I've seen it in real time with podcasts I've guested on, where they just come in conversation and giving no context to what this is. And it was 5 minutes before I was even talked about and introduced. So that, I don't want to say that's my ego here, but think of in terms of your audience. For 5 minutes, your audience had no idea what that episode was about. Okay, they read the title,
You're giving them
I guess.
context.
Yeah. So be better at that, hosts. And what Steve did, I mean, that's it. You know, it's just a quick little look up your guest's bio and just do a quick in real time intro like that, and that's it. You know, and it makes a big difference. It sets the tone. As far as editing, you know, there's two arguments. You know, there's keeping it real and natural and organic, or editing it. So and there's arguments for both, and I'm more closer to the organic side of things, or the far end to the other side is what's called scrub editing, where you're going to take out every blemish, every filler word, every every ah. Okay, so if done well, it will still have a flow. If not done well, your episode will sound choppy, and no one wants to hear that. Plus, we're all human. We all talk with filler words, you know, so it is natural. So if you're having interviews and you want to have it very conversational and genuine, it's okay if you leave some filler words in. It really is. You don't have to over edit. The real editing is when you sit back and you watch or listen through the interview you just did, and you want to shave time, you want to tighten it up, you want to go from 60 to 45 minutes. That's probably important. Cut out the fluff. Cut out, some of the, you might know in real time too. I'm sure this has happened to you, Steve. You ask a question that you were like, that was that question probably didn't land well, and the answer certainly doesn't land well. And it's not a bad thing, but it's something that's not going to serve the audience at all. So then, okay, well, there's 5 minutes we can take out. That's that's really the kind of editing you wanted to really focus on, is more content/contextual editing. Don't go crazy and spend an hour taking out every filler word. You're killing yourself on that. It's just taking too much time. So those are just a couple things that I feel like are definitely important, and that people, you can overthink the editing, and you can underthink the first 2 minutes of your podcast. So
yeah. Man, it's funny you say that. I actually did that this morning. I recorded a podcast this morning with a lady, and I asked this long. I thought it was going to be like my best question. And, you know, I have a certain amount of anchor questions, 3-4 questions that I kind of want to get to just kind of give me some ways to direct the conversation. And so one of them was like one of my main questions. I asked her, she said, I don't really know what you mean by that, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it went into a 2 or 3 minute deal of me trying to explain what I meant by the question, which things like that could be taken out, I guess, of the majority of podcasts, because like, I think what you're getting at is it doesn't provide value to the listener.
Right. And if it takes 2 minutes off, you find a few moments like that in your podcast, now you made something that was 60 minutes and okay down to 40 minutes of awesomeness, and it's just really more precise. So that's important too. But I will add to what you just said. I like the term you said, anchor questions. I never thought of it in the terms of anchor. I would say one more thing to any host out there is there's a sweet spot to preparing for your interview. Don't over prepare. Get your anchor questions. Do a little research. Go to your guest's LinkedIn page and find their website. That's all you need to do, and then you'll find out. Which is, I can tell what you did for me, Steve, and that's and it worked out. You gave the audience everything that I do, but give yourself some flexibility to zig and zag. It's absolutely crucial. You have to kind of just in real time feel the interview and where it's going, and if an answer sparks another question in it, that's the next question. Even make a note to the side if you feel like you don't want to forget it. Don't have that.
I keep a notepad. Yeah.
Right. Don't just be like, okay, I have to force this next question, even though I have a follow-up to that. Nope, that's not next in line. No, go with it. And if you have 5 anchor questions and the only one you asked was the first one and you had a great interview, that's awesome. That's a good thing, because you're in real time really just starting to feel the flow with the other person. People feel that. Audience feels that. And but have that anchor in case you get someone, and I know you've experienced this too, Steve, short answer people. So you can ask a great question and they give a good answer. They have it for you, so they give you that value knowledge. But there's not a whole lot of chit-chat behind it to keep it going, and you're like, okay, question number 2. So you want to be prepared for that. You want to have that backup, but a good interview.
It's almost scary.
It is, yeah.
and when somebody doesn't, or they just have a 2-second deal. I've experienced it the most, Derrick. I don't know if you've had experience with this, but with people that have a background in radio. I think they're used to getting in certain amount of thoughts in a certain amount of time. And I've interviewed some people that have a background in radio, and I'm just like, dude, I got 4 questions here. We're about to be done in 10 minutes.
Yeah, they're really they know how to encapsulate their thought and just punch it out. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's a good way to put it. As far as that's what they have to do. The radio personalities out there have to make sense quickly.
Yeah.
They don't usually use filler words. They're trained broadcasters. So on an editing front, you don't have to edit those people.
That's great. Yeah.
You just don't. They're good.
Yeah.
So.
What have you seen as far as a business is concerned? And clearly you have done this in your business, so I know that you agree with the model. Your podcast is about podcasting and things around podcasting in general. So of course you believe in this model, but clearly there's a difference between just having a 20-minute commercial for your business and actually providing value to the listener. Where do you think the fine line is between providing value for someone and they didn't even realize that you were in the business that you're talking about, and having a 30-minute commercial? What have you seen that works really well for businesses, or perhaps, some of your customers that do this really well?
Your business should almost never be mentioned. And I never, in conversations with some of my guests on PodLogix, well, we're talking about podcasting, so obviously part of my story is what I do. So it does come up from time to time. But first and foremost, audience, what do they need? And then if you have a guest, the guest is the highlight. The guest is the rock star. You just feed that guest and make them look amazing and let them talk about their business as much as they want to. So that's kind of the hierarchy. But it's okay. Your listeners are engaging with you. You're the constant in each episode. So you want to give up your personality. You want to put it out there. You want them to know who you are, and part of your story and part of who you are is the business. So, Steve, you would talk about your business. It's okay, but don't hit it, square in the nose with every 10 minutes you break into a new offering your business has. And that's not cool.
If you mention pricing, you've gone too far.
Right. So right, exactly. And then the know, like, trust. So Steve, people know you, they start listening to you, they like you. And then they're like, well, I trust this guy because he does know what he's talking about, and he brings on these awesome guests. And so through all that, they understand, oh, Steve's got it together. So I want to work with Steve without you giving them a 30-minute infomercial.
And it's incredible how that works out, that it's never the people that sell the most. It's so counterintuitive that the more you sell, the more it turns people off from wanting to do business with you, which is so counterintuitive, but just trust the process.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, there's a lot of big brands now, like Ford has a podcast, and I can't remember the name of it.
Oh, wow.
But they're not talking about wheels and ball joints and new models. It has nothing to do with vehicles. It's a podcast that's kind of twisted it in like how to find your brand in the marketplace. But it's just sponsored by Ford. It's branded.
Sure.
So you don't want to. It's not a Ford commercial. So even the big guys get that.
So, Derrick, in preparation for my final question, I do want to thank you for being on, for sure. But secondly, I want to thank you for the information that you put out. I've followed you on Instagram for a while now. The information that you are putting out for free, you're not doing what we're talking about. You're not trying to sell in every post or sell in every podcast. And especially for your podcast, I've learned quite a bit. I believe there's a guy, Travis Brown. Is that his name?
Yeah.
That was one of my favorite episodes that you had done around, some of the different nuances to podcasting. So in preparation for my final question, I just wanted to mention that and thank you for that. But what I typically like to do for the final question is ask somebody if they were talking to someone that's just starting out in business, or perhaps that's been plateaued in their business. But to that person, I think especially if someone is looking to start a podcast, if someone's looking to produce a podcast for their business, they would be at a point in their life probably that their business has already started and they're looking for ways to get over a plateau. And you have a wide experience to come at this question. Not only are you a business owner, but you're also, helping the podcast space. But so answer it from whichever angle you'd like. But what would you say to a person that is perhaps plateaued in their business and they're stretching and reaching for something to, kind of jump drive their business and get some more marketing out there and try to promote their business a little bit better?
Great question, because now you're tapping into my true passion, and that is being an agency and how I've built my business. I can talk for hours about podcasting and being your producer and all the right practices like we did. But this is a podcast about business, so this can kind of run a lot of parallels to no matter what industry you're in, as far as how my story is. So I plateaued. I was a freelance audio editor starting in 2018. I found Upwork.com. I'm sure everyone knows about it. And I saw this crazy demand for podcast audio editing. I was like, I can do that. And it was a side hustle to all kinds of other side hustles I had. And cause I know we've spoken pre-interview here. I was a musician for a while, and you always need other jobs when you're a musician. So it was another avenue to earn some income, get to work from home, work virtually. It was great. Well, that little side hustle got a little spark to it and started a little fired, and it started growing. And I was like, wow, this is cool. And I ran with it. And I kept following that path. Finally, something was kind of clicking. So I just kept learning and getting better at it. To the point where, after about 18 months, I found myself in this place where I can only edit so many hours in a week. I can only raise my rates so much. Steve, I wish I could go from $30 an hour to $500. That'd be nice. And then I was now growing, so I was getting better opportunities with better clients, but they needed more than editing. I couldn't offer everything they needed, so I was losing that opportunity because they just wanted to deal with one person that could handle it, whether it was me solely or maybe a team behind me. So that's when I was like, all right, I changed the mindset. I went from solopreneur to small business, having no idea how to do it. So key number one, don't be afraid. Take a chance. Try it. Started an LLC, hired one editor, and instantly began the journey that and 2.5 years later, I went from that one guy to having one editor with maybe $15,000 of revenue a year. It was this weird place where it was a hustle. To 2.5 years later, a team of 16, six-figure generating company. So I guess the lesson in that is, if you really want to grow, sometimes you have to take less on the front end to then grow. There's only so many hours in a week you can do what it is you do. If you're a solopreneur right now, you will max out. You have a ceiling and you will hit it. So what do you do to get past that ceiling? Well, I'm a big fan of building a team, building people to not only take stuff off your desk and open up bandwidth so now you can be more CEO, but then increase your offerings. Instead of one service, offer 5 services because you've brought team members in. And they can be contractors. They don't have to be full-time W-2 guaranteed 40-hour-a-week people. You don't have to jump to that. Just there's amazing entrepreneurs out there that would be more than happy to make $100 a month from you. If that's all you need them for, they're down with that. They're a freelancer. They're an entrepreneur. They're trying to stack clients themselves. So there's so many people out there that will do awesome work for you in all these different fields. So build a team for bandwidth and build a team for better offerings, and then now I can just speak for my world in podcasting. I just started getting clients that embraced that because they knew that I could give them all the assets and all the full production they needed, but they liked the fact that it wasn't all me. They felt more security because they knew they were dealing with a business that had a team of professionals, so they were going to get quality on a timely basis, consistent basis, and that's to this day one of my biggest selling points is I'm not just a lone producer here. I'm a business. So that can help you too. So that's kind of like my story and how I came to be.
I think that's the most frustrating thing that I hear from acquaintance entrepreneurs and people that I know that are business owners, that the solution to their problem is they're doing everything, and the solution to that problem would be to hire so that way they can do more. And a very extremely common answer to that is, well, I can't do that because I can't afford that. And I'm like, dummy, you knew that this was coming for years or months, or, it's not like this is a surprise that to hire somebody, it's going to cost this much. It's incredible how many people don't make that jump because they say, well, it's expensive to hire people. I'm like, well, either charge more or start saving, don't get your lifestyle to the deal.
Can I jump in and give the audience a formula?
Hit it.
Because there's a formula to change that mindset. If you hire someone, you technically are getting a raise. You're technically making more money. And here's what I mean. So for math purposes, let's say a client pays me $100. Let's say, Steve, you pay me $100 to edit your episode, and it takes 1 hour to do. Okay? So that's $60. Awesome. But it took me an hour to do it. I hire an editor, $20 an hour, and I give it to the editor. So now I'm only making $40 an episode, Steve. I just took a pay cut, right? No. How much of my time did it take to task your podcast to my editor? On the front end, back end, like the whole flow, the whole cycle of the episode, I've probably emailed you 2, 3, maybe 4 times. A couple Dropbox files. Let's max 10 minutes. Let's just say 15 minutes. So do you want to make $60 in an hour or $40 in 15 minutes? Give me $40 in 15 minutes all day long, because what that really is $160 an hour. Now that's your value. You didn't make $160 an hour. You made $40 in 15 minutes. But now that's your value. That's what your new worth is. And what you do with that remaining 45 minutes is key. Get on it and get another client, and you start stacking. So on the very front end, when you assign that first, again, we'll talk about podcasters. Pretend I'm talking to a bunch of producers right now. The minute you assign that first episode to someone, yes, your overall revenue just dipped a little bit. Okay, it did. Until you get that next client, and now you're in the black again, and now you're profiting. The ceiling is lifted. There's no more ceiling left. So you need to change your mindset. Paying someone to do something for you is not losing money. You're buying time, and then your value increases. So now now I have a bunch of clients where I make $40 for 15 minutes. So that goes now. I mean, you have scenarios where you can be making $200 an hour, and because of that extrapolation, So that's the mindset I always try to teach people is in order to grow, you got to buy time, and what you do with that time is what makes you grow exponentially, and then you can't. And then you get to a point where you can't hire people fast enough. Like, who else can I hire? What else can I do? Bring them in, So that's how I look at it.
That's an incredible way to look at it, Derrick. I appreciate you bringing that up, and because I like I said, that's one of the most common things I hear is, I can't afford it, but switching that mindset is a great way to think about it. All of this talk about employees has got me stressed out. I don't know what I got 20 or 30 of these guys running around, so it's made me stress out wondering what's going on. So I'm sure you're the same way. You've got people running around, and you've got to get back to. So thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate your unique perspective around podcasting, and if anyone is interested in podcasting, of course they can visit your website in my show notes that I'll have linked below.
Awesome. And free consultations, 15-minute consultations. So you'll see right there on my homepage. Go there. If you're interested, click it. You'll get a Calendly link. Grab a spot, and let's meet.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Derrick.
Thank you, Steve.